12 o'clock on your Tuesday afternoon. Welcome in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head with you, flying solo for the next couple of hours. Terry Ford out for the day. We'll be back in coming up tomorrow. Got Dimitri Ravenos going to jump in with me here in the 1 o'clock hour. We're also hear from Shane Beamer at the bottom of this hour, coming up at 12:30 for his weekly spring football press conference as practice number 6 went on a little bit earlier on this morning. So we're right at almost halfway through spring practice. Less than 3 weeks away from the spring game coming up on April the 20th. So interested to hear what Coach Beamer has to say as, this is a team that this offseason, I think we're going to continue to have more questions than answers, because when you talk about having so many new pieces, so many new faces, so many rooms that have been revamped and revitalized, whether that be out of need or just by the natural cycle of guys, graduating and leaving and all that kind of stuff, we're not really going to know what we have with South Carolina, I believe, until we get into actually playing the season, kicking off against Old Dominion and then taking on Kentucky in week number 2. I think by then we'll have a better idea, but through spring and summer, I think it's still going to be a lot of questions waiting to see how this team really gels as a unit when they take it to the field coming up in this fall. So again, hearing from Coach Beamer coming up at 12:30 with his weekly spring football press conference. Last night was fun. There's a lot of times when events get hyped up and don't quite live up to what you were expecting them to be. And, you see the commercials and all that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, the game still has to be the game. And sometimes that hype and anticipation can let you down a little bit when you see the final product, on television. But last night's conclusion of the Elite Eight for women's basketball was exactly what it was built to be. 4 great programs, all fighting to get those final 2 spots in the Final Four. Star power galore between all 4 teams, and all of the girls that were advertised stepped up and had great performances. Obviously, the headline goes to Iowa taking down LSU 94-87 in a rematch of last year's national championship game, where, the dynamic going into the game was, okay, well, LSU just ran over Iowa season ago. Yeah, Caitlin Clark got her points, but had to take a lot of shots in the process of getting there. How's this going to go the second time around? And Iowa, led by Caitlin Clark with another career-making performance, goes out there and just outpaces what is a good LSU team. Obviously, you made it this far, and we've seen it up close and personal with South Carolina, how good they can be, but Iowa just ended up being the better team last night. And it ended up, it was Caitlin Clark playing out of her mind, shooting the lights out, and helping her team shoot great overall from the floor last night. And now Iowa gets a chance to head to the Final Four once again. And Caitlin Clark, who has accomplished pretty much everything in the sport of women's basketball, won about every conceivable award, set tons and tons of records. The one thing that is not on her resume as she gets set to head off the WNBA is winning a national championship. South Carolina could be the team that prevents her from doing that. If South Carolina wins on Friday, if Iowa wins on Friday, and both teams take each other on the national championship, you want to talk about revenge and redemption from a year ago, where Iowa prevented South Carolina from going to another national championship, a game that I think we all feel pretty confident based on what we had seen earlier that season with South Carolina running over LSU here at Colonial Life Arena. I think we're all pretty confident in saying that if South Carolina would have gotten a rematch with LSU last year, they probably would have beat them in the national championship. Unfortunately, Caitlin Clark and Iowa got in the way. So now you have this dynamic of, okay, well, if both teams win their first game on Friday and match up on Sunday, you get the ultimate revenge of being the team that could prevent Caitlin Clark from accomplishing the ultimate goal in her college career of winning a national championship. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because, again, you still got to play the games coming up on Friday and get past a very, very good NC State team if you're South Carolina. And on the flip side of things, Iowa's got to get past UConn, which is not an easy task by any means. And UConn, in a weird way, I don't want to say it's flying under the radar necessarily, but not being talked about as much. And this is a program that, look, under Gino Auriemma has been dominant. They've been to so many Final Fours, won a ton of national championships, the whole 9 yards. He's going to go down as one of the, if not the greatest coaches in women's college basketball, and rightfully so. And the story of this team this year, and South Carolina played them not all that long ago. We knew that they were a team that was down a lot of talent due to injuries this year, and basically have to keep their starting five on the court the entire game. But Paige Beckers, who, was kind of taking a back seat on that side of the bracket to Caitlin Clark and to Angel Reese and to those two teams, reminded you last night, if you'd forgotten, of how special of a talent she was and the performance that she put out against Southern Cal to help lead Connecticut to the 80-73 victory. 28 points, 11 of 23 from the field, grabbed 10 rebounds as well. And as excited as I was for LSU and Iowa last night, I'm just as excited for Iowa and UConn coming up on Friday. And the storyline dynamic of that is going to revolve around Paige Beckers and Caitlin Clark going head-to-head. And I think that's going to be very fun. And there's obviously pieces around them as well, but those are the two headliners that are going to garner the most attention. And again, I think this is going to be a fun one for sure. And then on the flip side of things, again, Carolina taking on North Carolina State, a team that nobody's really talking about, to be honest with you. And they will happily play that underdog role. I will guarantee you that. But they're the one non-brand in the women's Final Four, where you have Carolina, who multiple national championships, multiple Final Four appearances, all that stuff. Iowa, Caitlin Clark, enough said. UConn, the legacy that they have, and then NC State. Now, NC State is also a 3 seed like UConn is. It's interesting. So should be a fun one coming up on Friday, but last night's games certainly lived up to the billing. Very entertaining on both fronts. Obviously, Southern Cal and LSU end up getting sent home. End of the line, seemingly, for Angel Reese at LSU. And, what has been a great career for her. Obviously won the national championship a season ago and is going to have the opportunity to go to the WNBA. I know she hasn't officially announced it yet, but I am not going to be shocked when she does. It's been a big part of LSU's quick success under Kim Mulkey. And now she'll move on to the next level. And, on the other end of the spectrum, you have Southern Cal, who is just kind of starting their rise, it feels like. And they're a team and a program that a lot of people haven't put a ton of eyes on as of late. And a lot of that has to do with the fact they're out there on the West Coast, and a lot of the games started, late at night, so maybe you weren't up for watching those games, and it just wasn't as readily available to you as some of the more regional action was as far as women's basketball. You've probably heard about Juju Watkins, though. And Juju Watkins is a very special talent and is being positioned as maybe that next superstar in women's college basketball, where Clark's going to move on, Angel Reese likely going to move on, Camila Cardoso for South Carolina, who announced yesterday that she's going to the WNBA draft, also going to move on as well. So you look around and say, okay, who's that next big star? It might be Juju Watkins, and she is talented enough to be that. And we saw that last night, 29 points, 9 of 25 from the field for her in 39 minutes of action. So she really never left the court either in that loss to UConn, as Southern Cal was the number 1 seed. So just coming up short this year, but she's not going anywhere. And she's a name you're going to hear about for the next several years quite a bit. And I know, looking at this tournament for South Carolina's perspective, I think everybody kind of set their sights on Iowa and this potential rematch in the national championship. I think a year from now, you're probably talking about maybe being on a collision course with Southern Cal and taking on Juju Watkins. And how does South Carolina handle that? Now, again, I'm not trying to get too far ahead of myself because that is a year from now, but it's something to consider because I think she is positioning herself to maybe be that biggest star in women's basketball over these next couple seasons, which is really cool to see. And, I don't want to say last night was necessarily a passing of the torch type of thing, but it allowed her to, show out in front of an audience of people that maybe hadn't paid attention to her before. And, again, she's a name you're going to be talking about for many, many years to come. So now Final Four is set for Cleveland this upcoming weekend. Carolina and NC State will get things rolling on Friday night at 7 o'clock. You'll be able to listen to that game right here on the game starting at 6:30. And then the nightcap will be UConn and Iowa somewhere around 9 o'clock, depending on what time South Carolina and NC State wrap up. And then winners of that go on to Sunday for the national championship. And then a week from now, specifically a week from now, all of college basketball will be done for this year with the men's national championship game coming up on next Monday. So only a handful more games. It's been a fun and crazy season in a lot of ways over the course of both the men's and the women's year. So excited to see what happens. Wrapping it up with a hopefully great weekend on both fronts when it comes to college basketball. So should be a good time, and hopefully we're talking about South Carolina winning a national championship once again on the women's side, and this time next week, and looking forward to parade somewhere around here as well. So should be fun. Look forward to it, and you'll see what happens. One thing we haven't gotten to dive into a whole lot this week so far, I mentioned a little bit yesterday, Major League Baseball opening weekend this past weekend. Atlanta Braves went on the road to Philadelphia, took two of three from the Philadelphia Phillies, won yesterday against the White Sox as well in a rain-shortened game up there that Braves already had well in hand. Coming up next here on the halftime show, going to be joined by my buddy Garrett Chapman from 92.9 The Game in Atlanta, giving us his thoughts and his insights on what he's seen so far from an Atlanta perspective with the Braves to start their season. Then again, Coach Beamer coming up at 12:30 as we hit his usual Tuesday spring press conference. That's all coming up. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you on your Tuesday on The Game. Welcome back in. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, flying solo here on your Tuesday afternoon. Again, going to hear from Coach Beamer coming up in a little over 10 minutes for his usual Tuesday spring presser as practice number 6 of spring practice wrapped up a little bit earlier on this morning. But it's time to talk some baseball. Over the weekend was opening weekend for Major League Baseball. Braves had to wait an extra day to get things rolling up there in Philadelphia, but walked out of the city of brotherly love with a series victory, taking the 2 out of the first 3 games there, and picked up another one yesterday in Chicago in a rainy game against the White Sox. Joining me now on Love Chevrolet Phone Lines to talk about the Braves is my buddy from 92.9 The Game in Atlanta, Garrett Chapman. First of all, Garrett, appreciate your time this morning, and I know we talk about a busy time here in Columbia, up in the A, between the Braves, the Hawks making a playoff push, the draft coming up here in a couple weeks. I know you guys are plenty busy out there yourselves.
Yeah, we got a lot going on here in Atlanta. I mean, you're very generous to say that the Atlanta Hawks are making a playoff push. I mean,
they're on the edge. They're right on the edge.
They'll be in the play-in game. I guess we'll match up with the Chicago Bulls again. But no, Tyler, it's great to be with you, man. Long time. It's been a long time, and I'm glad to be catching up with you again.
Absolutely. Well, you can give us the best insight on this. Coming into the season, obviously a 100-win season a season ago for the Braves, getting knocked out of the playoffs by the Phillies, funny enough, in the divisional series. What was the vibe in the A around this team coming into the season?
Expectations are through the roof for this team. I mean, we know what this offense is capable of. I mean, they set MLB records. They were, in my opinion, the best offense in the history of baseball, right up there with like the 1926 Yankees. I mean, the offense was as good as any we've ever seen in the history of this league. And expectations were sky high. You know, this is a team where they were down at spring training, and the number one topic of conversation, it seemed like, was the phrase World Series or bust. It's a phrase that they're not afraid of because they understand that those are the expectations. You are supposed to be going and competing and winning World Series like you did back in 2021. Because the offense is going to be right back to what it was last year. Jared Kelenic, the only new real addition to the offense, he's picked up perfectly. I mean, he's already got, 6 hits on the season. He's hitting the ball very well. He changed up his swing a little bit. And the pitching staff, you added Chris Sale to this rotation. It's one of the very best pitching rotations in baseball, and that was one of the biggest shortcomings 2 years ago when they lost to Philly. Last year is the hitting that didn't show up, ironically. But, look, the vibes are very strong. Atlanta loves the Braves. I think this team is going to explode.
Well, hopefully so. Going to be fun to watch as the season goes along. We'll start off with the pitching there. You mentioned Chris Sale coming in from the Red Sox, obviously somebody that had dealt with a couple of injuries these past couple seasons, had not been in his true form like he was, 4 or 5 years ago. But good start the other day against Philadelphia. Goes 5 1/3, only gives up 5 hits and 2 runs. And really, when you talk about the starting pitchers through the first 4 games, everything great with the exception of Max Fried. That game on Saturday just could not quite get a handle on the ball. Had 3 walks there through just the 2/3 of the inning. They ended up pitching and surrendering 3 runs as well. We look at that as an anomaly. We know how good Max Fried is. Unfortunately, the Braves were still able to pick up the win because the offense really lit it up on Saturday against the Phillies.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still waiting to see where that pitch missed, that third strike that Max Fried had that would have gotten us out of the inning and him into the second inning where because he's had a history of doing things like that, kind of stumbling through a first inning. And we know, like you said, who Max Fried is when he is pitching at his very best. So there's no reason to be concerned. But Chris Sale, I mean, you mentioned the injuries, and Alex Anthopoulos was asked a lot about those because why would you bring in a 35-year-old pitcher who can't seem to stay healthy? Well, the answer is pretty clear, just because a lot of those injuries were kind of freaky, weird accidents. One, I mean, he was on a bicycle. He literally got hit by, I think he was hit by a car or something like that on a bicycle. Another one, and the others are just comebackers, where it's just bad luck. So it doesn't have as much to do with the fact that, let's say, he has like overuse on his arm, or his delivery is all as like kind of janky or something like that. But we don't see that with Chris Sale necessarily. He is a strikeout maestro. I mean, the dude, 11.1 strikeouts per 9 career average, which is the best in Major League Baseball history. And you pair that with a guy like Spencer Strider, and this is a very fearsome rotation to be going up against. And the biggest thing is you add another good arm to a rotation that's already strong. And it was a rotation move for the postseason. That's really what that move was all about. Max Fried, we've seen what he's able to do in the postseason. Spencer Strider still looking to find his stride, no pun intended, in the postseason. He looked pretty good last year. We'll see what he does in the build-up to this year. I mean, he added the third pitch. And look, the dude is a strikeout king. He is, in my opinion, one of the front runners for the Cy Young Award. He will be throughout the course of this year. And look, this rotation is very strong.
Again, talking to Garrett Chapman from 92.9 The Game in Atlanta about the Atlanta Braves and their start to the season, 4 games in. You mentioned the offense a season ago and how historic it was. Obviously, that was led by Ronald Acuna with the 40 home runs and the 70 stolen bases, coming off of a career year. I listened to a quote from Brian Snicker last week talking about Ronald believes that he can be even better this time around, and that's almost kind of hard to believe, gotten off to a pretty good start so far this season. But, where do you see Ronald Acuna's ceiling being in 2024? Still got you?
Oh, sorry. No, when he's at his best, Ronald Acuna is potentially stealing a lot of bases. He's running, he's hitting, he's doing everything on the field, right? He's a 5-tool player. He can do everything. But I don't necessarily see him stealing 70 bases this year, just because I think potentially you're going to have a Michael Harris situation where he can maybe move up to the top of the lineup, and then Ronald can come back and hit a little bit more for power and kind of create more runs that way. I do think that we see a little bit more of that, if not this year, in the coming years. But Ronald Acuna is the best player in baseball. He's a 5-tool player. He can do everything, every single thing. And he's just playing. He's just having fun. And really, I don't know if you had a chance to read his article in the Players Tribune.
I did. I thought that was really well done. Good insight for somebody that, because of the language barrier, we don't hear a lot from as far as in detail about his life. So it was really cool to kind of get that glimpse into the early days of Ronald Acuna Jr.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And it really did, like you said, it gives you kind of an inside look at a guy who, he was 14, 15, 16 years old and coming to a foreign country where he doesn't speak the language, doesn't understand the customs. He came from a smaller village in Venezuela, and then all of a sudden he's in Florida, which, we all know what the state of Florida is like. So it's kind of a foreign place for even a Georgian like me, so it's, but look, ultimately, Ronald Acuna, the ceiling, the sky's the limit for the guy. The guy can be as good as anybody else in baseball, and I would not be surprised if he's right there in the finalists or taking home his second straight MVP.
Last one for you here. You never want to have injuries earlier on in the season. We saw Sean Murphy go down with the oblique strain in game number 1 after having a very solid first year with the Braves a season ago. Doesn't seem like it's going to be too big of a deal. Going to be out for a couple of days. You obviously have Travis d'Arnaud that stepped up into that main role. Then you bring in Chadwick Trump, who had a pretty good spring, all things considered, up from AAA. And again, it's just kind of one of those things where you're just kind of maintaining it for a period of time, but you hope this isn't a continuing issue with Sean Murphy as the season goes along.
Yeah, these types of injuries, the oblique, it can be a little tricky. Obviously, he's a catcher, so he's going to be moving around and moving his torso a great deal, more than probably anybody else on the diamond. But that's the beautiful thing about what Alex Anthopoulos has done, is he has provided depth on this roster just in case these things happen. The Braves like to play their guys 162 games, but one position that you really can't do that is catcher. And we're very fortunate in the fact that Travis d'Arnaud can come off and they can platoon when Sean Murphy is healthy, or Travis d'Arnaud can come in and be potentially your everyday catcher. And you mentioned Trump. Trump's a great player. He's a good player for you to have as a just-in-case kind of guy. There's not going to be a severe drop-off or anything whenever he comes in. He's obviously not going to give you the potential of either at the plate that Travis d'Arnaud or Sean Murphy would necessarily, but he's not a bad catcher by any means, and he's a great third option. Travis d'Arnaud, though, the dude is a beast. The guy can do pretty much anything that Sean Murphy can do. Sean Murphy is a great defensive catcher. You see the way that the rotation picks up whenever he's behind the plate, but there's not a severe drop-off whenever Travis d'Arnaud is back there. So that kind of gives the Braves the flexibility to let Sean Murphy come along as slow as possible. He's only on the 10-day IL. Wouldn't surprise me to see him by the end of the month here very soon, but hopefully we see him by the end of the month. But it's not too big of a deal. It's the best possible scenario if you're Sean Murphy.
Well, it's been a good start of the season. Next game coming up later on this evening, taking on White Sox in game number 2 after winning that rainy one up there yesterday in the afternoon. And Garrett, we'll check in with you more as the season goes along. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely, man.
All right, that was Garrett Chapman from 92.9 The Game in Atlanta. We'll hit a break, come back. Shane Beamer heading to the podium in just a moment to give us his thoughts on another week of spring practice here in Columbia. That's coming up. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you here on The Game. Welcome back into the halftime show. Tyler Head with you on this Tuesday afternoon. Coach Beamer at the podium at the football facility, giving his thoughts on the latest on spring practice. Let's get out to him now.
Just old, what I am, so great. Appreciate everybody being here as well. Another good day, just finished practice number 6. So I mentioned last week, gave our guys the weekend off, so they had Easter weekend off. Hope everyone had a great Easter. Guys had a great practice last Thursday, then Friday, Saturday, Sunday off, back at it yesterday, and with meetings and lifting, and then back on the practice field today. That's a lot of situational work done today, some more third down work, introduced short yardage goal line. So we had some live goal line reps at the end of practice, which is always good to increase the energy and the competitive spirit at practice. So I like the way these guys are working without a doubt. And over a third of the way done with spring practice. Got a lot of work to do, but like the start that we've had so far. Nothing really, not too much to add injury-wise. The only new addition that'll be out for the rest of the spring is Bradley Dunn. Had a little bit of an ankle injury that is going to keep him from being able to finish the next 3 weeks of spring practice. Nothing long-term. He'll be back and be fine by this summer, but he just won't be able to finish spring practice. Brad's done a good job for us getting reps at running back, and then did a lot of good things on special teams for us last season. So obviously our running back depth is thin right now with Juju. Obviously we'd already talked about being out for the rest of the spring. Now Brad out for the rest of the spring. Rocket was already out with his shoulder injury going into spring practice. So we're getting pretty thin there right now, but Jawarn Howe and Oscar Attaway are healthy and getting the bulk of the reps right now. Doing a great job. So we will be back out on the field Thursday, introduce a little bit of red zone work on Thursday, or a lot of red zone work on Thursday, and then we'll have our first scrimmage of the spring on Saturday morning as well, followed by our annual Ladies' Day for all the fantastic ladies that want to take part. We've had it done it the last 2 years. Been awesome attendance, a lot of fun. Still open for anyone that wants to come. I think I'm saying that right. If it's sold out and we've already cut off registration, I apologize, but I think we still have room as well. So we'll do that on Saturday, and no better way to cap off this Saturday than Ladies' Day as well. Hopefully at that time we're also celebrating Coach Staley and our women's team's first win up in Cleveland, and then they'll be getting ready for the national championship the next day as well. So congratulations to Coach Staley and her team, and what an awesome run they were on. Got to get 2 more here this weekend, but so much respect for them, and just every single week or every single game to be able to get the best shot of the opponent and still just continue to respond week after week. So ton of respect for them, cheering hard for them, and excited for the opportunity they'll have this weekend. And with that, questions? Is David on strike, or what is going on with David Cloninger, man? My Lord, Gene Sapakoff retires, and this David just quits coming to the press conferences. They don't play till Friday. From Albany? Yeah, I guess so. Heck of a trip in the Northeast, huh? So apologies, David. I hope the Northeast is treating you well and making you appreciate the South even more.
Shane, with the scrimmage on Saturday, what are some of the main things you're kind of looking to see, in the first scrimmage of the year?
Yeah, a lot. One, just guys being able to get out there and execute and be efficient without coaches on the field and coaching every single play, just letting our guys be able to get out there and play a little. We've done a little bit of live tackling work in a couple of our practices already this spring and whatnot. So, but it'll be the first day where the entire day is, tackling and playing it like a game. We'll have SEC officials that'll be out there on Saturday. So our guys, can we play, somewhat, penalty free? There's going to be penalties, but hopefully we get in that stadium and we don't have a lot of the pre-snap penalties and things like that we can control. And then really just how guys respond, and we talk a lot about when we go across the street into that stadium, our mentality and what an opportunity and blessing it is to be able to go into Williams-Brice Stadium. And some people, whether it's 80,000 people in there or a Saturday morning with about 50 people in there, a lot of guys, they flip a switch and they rise to the occasion, if you will, and eager to see who really just steps up, because we got some great competitive battles going on in a lot of different positions, and it'll be the morning time, so the lights won't be on, but figure of speech wise, when the lights come on, who responds, and that's what I'm eager to see.
Shane, piggybacking off of that, whether it be the scrimmage on Saturday or just how things have been going in practice so far this spring, what's that transition been like with Joe DeCamillis coming in? Because, maybe he has different philosophies in terms of how he wants to do things, and maybe it's trying to mesh with what you have from a philosophy standpoint. And obviously for these players, the last couple of years, they've been learning from a different coach. So what's that process been like?
It's been a learning process for sure, what he coaches, what he teaches, what he wants. And then we've tried to marry a lot of the stuff that we did here previously with Pete. There's things when I met with Joe and when we hired Joe that I talked about, look, I'm a big believer in this, I want to continue to call it this, whether it be a team or a technique or a scheme or whatever it might be. But for the most part, I want him to be able to, I hired him for a reason, and I want him to be able to implement his system. And there's a lot of carryover, but there's a lot of things technique-wise that are a little bit different as well. Meetings, as I mentioned before, are intense. The practice field's intense. And the competition out there is really high and intense. So it's been great, certainly high energy. I think they've connected well with Joe. He's really done a good job of connecting well with them. It's great being able to, he can show, okay, we're doing this drill today, and here's Aaron Donald from the LA Rams doing the same drill on field goal block, or here is so-and-so on this kickoff cover drill that we're going to do today, or whatever it might be. So being able to show NFL practice clips of here's the pros doing it and here's what we do has been good. And I think it's been a good transition. We've probably done a little bit more, not less drill work. We still do a lot of drill work, but probably a little bit more just 11-on-11 work in the spring. And a lot of guys are getting reps, and it's really going to be good for our just overall development, the amount of guys that are getting reps in a team type setting, 11-on-11 setting.
Has there been any separation in the quarterback competition? And besides perfection, what do you want to see from your quarterback Saturday?
I wouldn't say separation. Those guys are continuing to battle. Obviously, when you talk about going in the stadium and guys being able to separate themselves, that's a position that they'll all get a lot of reps on Saturday, and a lot of reps. And they'll get an opportunity to kind of show how they handle operating the offense with the coaches not out there telling them everything and coaching every single rep. So I think some guys there'll be some separation on Saturday, I would imagine, just because how we're going to set it up, and you hope there is, but there's great competition going in there. A lot of those guys are getting reps, and they're all competing and making each other better. The biggest thing, Phil, I would say, is just one, how they operate. Okay, they're in the stadium now, and it's a scrimmage, game-like setting with officials and everything. How can guys operate? Can they run the offense and communicate and the things that you have to do, and then certainly protecting the ball. They've done a really good job of that. As the head coach, you love it when there's a lot of turnovers from a defensive standpoint because they're taking the ball away, and then you don't like it as an offensive coach or as a head coach because the offense is turning the ball over too much. And then when the offense doesn't turn it over, you're excited for the offense, but you're like, man, we got to continue to take the ball away like we've done a great job of defensively. But the last two practices, we've done a really good job offensively of protecting the football. I think there was one turnover today and one interception today, but it was a ball that got kind of ricocheted, bang play with a receiver and a DB, and the ball popped up in the air, and it was DQ Smith running to the ball and made an interception. But for the most part, the quarterbacks have done a good job of making good decisions, and want to see them continue to just do that on Saturday for sure.
Will any of those quarterbacks be live on Saturday?
It's a good question. I was thinking about that last night, Hale. I don't know yet. We've done that in the past, in the springtime and August. Last year we did in the scrimmages. We made everyone but Spencer and Luke were live, and we tackled. And it was good for them to understand that, we've got 5 guys blocking and the defense brings a 6th guy, you're going to get hit. And you can't sit there and hang on to the ball. So it's good for them to learn from that standpoint. Some of those quarterbacks love it because I blew the whistle today one time, and Robbie Ashford was mad at me because he didn't think there was any way that the defender would have been able to make that tackle in a real game. And Lenoris really stepped up last year in those situations where we made him live. So it's something that we'll talk about as a staff. I know that's a long answer to say I don't know yet.
And at receiver with all those new faces, how's that gone with that group? And do you feel like you have like a certain number of guys that are sort of first group type?
Yeah, I think still trying to figure it out. You know, you think about it, we're over a third of the way through, but we're not even halfway done with spring ball. So I think those guys right now guys continue to flash at times. You know, I would say that Gage is somebody that every day I've noticed for something, whether it be getting a great release off the line of scrimmage or a catch and run. You know, guys that were freshmen last year, like Tyshawn Russell, he's flashed. I think all those guys have at times. So I think for them right now, it's continuing to learn what to do, trying to eliminate the clutter out of their heads so they can just go play fast and not have to think so much. But I think all those guys are doing a great job. And to sit there and say, okay, these are our top 4 right now, we're not to that point. I bet you if you asked every offensive coach, okay, who would be the top 6 receivers right now if we played a game, I bet you you'd get different answers from all of them, because I think they've all done a good job of competing and eager to see, you know, what they do when the ball gets in their hands on Saturday.
Hey, Shane, you mentioned that, you know, the spring break schedule at South Carolina had a lot to do with how you scheduled the spring practice. But with the portal opening on April 15th, did that, you know, at all influence your decision, or does that even matter that it's opening and you guys are still in spring practice?
I think there's a lot when you set the spring practice schedule. I love it, but I'm in a unique state where no matter when we make the spring game, half the fan base is going to be ticked off at me because it's either the Masters weekend or the Heritage weekend. And if it's the Masters weekend, everybody's mad. How could you do the spring game the weekend of the Masters? And if you do it the weekend of the Heritage and Hilton Head, they're mad at me. How could you do the spring game the same weekend as the Heritage and Hilton Head? So that enters your thinking a little bit. So this year, it's the same weekend as the Heritage. So I apologize to that segment of the fan base that's not happy about that. I think it was a little bit, certainly I thought about the portal when it's opening, but it is what it is. I really just kind of liked it that we have the spring game, and then literally the spring game is Saturday and our last day of class is on Monday. So it's literally 48 hours, not even 48 hours after the spring game's over. It's the last day of class. I think it's Monday this year, but it's that week as well. So I like just being able to finish spring practice and then into the semester, and they go right into exams. We're having kind of our exit meetings as well. And then going back to the beginning of spring practice, probably the biggest thing that we just pushed it back was giving our guys an extra week in the weight room after spring break. You know, so we've always done our off-season conditioning, winter workouts, weight room plan, January, February. They would go on spring break, and then they come back from spring break, and then it was right into practice on like Tuesday. So this year we said, let's give these guys, as much as I like to think when they were in, I think Luke Doty went to Cancun. Luke may have, but as much as I like to think when our players were in Mexico or wherever else that they were working out and they were training for spring practice the next week, they probably weren't. So instead of just throwing them right back into it, let's give them a week to kind of reacclimate to the weight room, running, ramp up, and then be ready to roll right into spring practice the following week, and gives us an extra week in the weight room physically and gives us another week in the meeting room to continue to learn with so many new players that are learning a system, offense, defense, and special teams for the first time. So it's a combination of golf, class schedules, and physical ramping up for spring practice.
I think Carolina Cup was a factor at one point.
Yeah, I think so. That was, yeah. There's a lot. There's a lot, man. Yeah. All the things they don't tell you about when you become a head coach. All the things you have to balance.
Yeah, I got a couple more for you. With Kelton Henderson no longer being on the rosters, was that his decision, y'all's decision? Can you share?
That was our decision. Think a lot of Kelton, wish him well, but there's a expectation level of how we're going to do things in this program, inside this building and outside this building, and just a body of work that wasn't what we wanted as well. And care about him, want to help him in any way. Told him I would call anybody for him. He's a guy that has ability and be pulling for him, but just he won't be here.
And so far, he's the only departure from the roster at this point in the spring. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And at defensive end, with again a lot of new faces, how has that gone in particular with Gilbert, who's I guess not new per se, but how's he integrated back into things?
Really good, like a lot more depth for sure. You know, when you talk about, okay, we lost Jordan Strawn and then Tyreek as well. But when you look at who you return, guys that are a year older that were freshmen last season, like Desmond, you bring in a guy like a Dylan Stewart, and then you bring in, you know, transfers like Kyle Kennard. It's just it's an athletic group. They look the part. There's more depth in that room, and that's another one that we'll be able to play a lot more guys on Saturday, and I think we're going to be even more disruptive at that position than what we were last year in regards to stopping the run and being able to rush the passer also.
Shane, you kind of talked about this a couple weeks ago with Nick Harbor, and we've seen him pop up in the limited practices that we have an opportunity to go to. There's been 6. I don't, you don't have to give me an exact number, but how many of those practices do you feel like he has been at? And outside of obviously his obligations, both as a student athlete, has he been popping up trying to catch some passes? We've heard Lenore say that they've gone out maybe twice a week, obviously with there's so many new faces in the wide receiver room, just trying to develop that rapport. Do you have any idea if he's been able to do that?
Yeah, I believe so, in regards to he and Lenoris and other guys being able to do stuff on their own. He and Coach Furry being able to do kind of stuff on their own within the rules and whatever Nick wants to do. But when class isn't conflicting with his schedule, he's here. You know, so obviously the weekends, I think the last 2 weekends they've had track meets. Last week I think they were in Florida, and the weekend before they were here. So he hasn't been around on Saturdays. We weren't here this Saturday, but he hasn't really been around on the weekends. And then Monday, Wednesday, Friday are days that we meet and lift as well for the morning. So he's working around class schedule on that, but it works out pretty good for the practice days. He was here today as well, and he's adamant about being a great football player. And it's not like when he's here, oh my God, Nick's in the building and all that. It's just what you kind of expect. And walk in, there he is sitting front row in the team meeting or second row in the team meeting, right in the middle and involved. So he wants to give his all to track and be the very best he can be there for those guys. But then he also wants to be his very best for football and give everything he can to football also.
You mentioned the running back depth is a little thin right now with the injuries, but with Oscar and Jawarn, what have you seen from them? And is there kind of, I assume that they're taking these spring practices and thinking, okay, this is going to give us a better chance to compete in the fall and possibly get on the field?
Yeah, absolutely. Really been impressed with those guys. Obviously Oscar's an older guy that's been around, so he's got a great, maturity and mindset about himself and all business as well. You can tell he's played a lot of football. Jawarn obviously was a decorated player last year at South Carolina State, but you forget he's still a freshman and a year out of high school, so he's still very raw and learning. But 2 unique skill sets. Those guys are just steady. They don't say a whole lot. They don't get too high or too low. But they both, we did a live 5-play goal line period today, offense versus defense, put the ball down on like the 1 yard line and a half and just best out of 5. And, they had a couple runs in there that to me showed what they're about. Downhill, put their face in there and would not be denied in regards to trying to get it in the end zone. So like what those guys are about and how they continue to get better. And both are going to be really, really good players for us this season as well.
You mentioned Dylan Stewart a minute ago. What has stood out about him so far as he works to get acclimated to college ball?
Probably just the natural, God-given size and ability. He's big. He can run. He can jump. He's physical. He's just he's not your typical freshman, without a doubt. And obviously he was very highly recruited for a reason, but he's another one that you don't notice him. He's just out there. You notice him, but you don't notice him in regards for the wrong reasons. He's just kind of steady, does his job day in, day out, and has fit in well with that group. And to me, just continuing to learn the techniques that we want to play with and the techniques that we're coaching and the effort that we want to play with, but doing a lot of really good things for us out there right now.
Shane, kind of talk about the red zone a little more. When you look back at last year, how would you kind of evaluate, assess the way you guys were able to, handle those types of spots? And then, with this year, with those types of situations, are you guys trying to do anything maybe like different or anything, to have more success in those spots?
Yeah, I think overall weren't good enough. If you just look at our record and whatnot, we didn't do a lot of things well enough last season. But in regards to being able to finish drives, I think we had our moments, but certainly games like North Carolina stand out where I think we were inside the 20-yard line 3 times and didn't score, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So being able to get down there and then finish, and then defensively, a team's going to get down there, but when they do, you got to, hold them to field goals and try and keep points off the board in general. So, certainly need to be better, without a doubt. Every year is different, looking at scheme, offense and defense, as far as what you're going to do. Each week's different, depending on teams and what their philosophy is in the red zone. Are you playing a defense that they're going to pressure you once you cross the 20-yard line? Or are you playing a team that they're going to rush for and play coverage and make you make throws? So every week is different. But overall, got to be better. We got to make sure we come out of there with points, preferably touchdowns, without a doubt. So there'll be some schematic tweaks week to week and year to year. And then practice-wise, nothing too crazy. A couple little tweaks, not this week, but next week, that we'll do in practice, just to kind of make the defense a little bit more of a competitive period when we do the red zone, and kind of a point system for the defense and a point system for the offense, where you can compete and have a winner offense defense down there that we're going to implement this year for the first time just in practice. But overall, just got to coach it better and play better down there.
When Clayton was in here a couple weeks ago and he was talking about being flexible between the four down, 3 down stuff, how do you guys try to structure that this time of year when you're, I guess, 2 different types of schemes in a way? Is there like, hey, one day we're going to do just this stuff, and 2 days we'll do that? Like, how does that?
Yeah, no, great question. It's a little bit of, defensively, it may be a thing where, all right, the defense is going to rep both today, but not both of them against the offense. And like last week, Hale, it was, or the first week even, and last week, it was, all right, when we do this period versus the defense, you're only going to play 4 down this period. This period, you can play 3 down. Or this period, the first 4 plays, defense is going to be 4 down. Next 4 plays are going to be 3 down. So it's kind of, each day is different. And a lot of that is based on what you're installing too. So today was a big short yardage goal line emphasis day. So you're probably not going to do a lot of, 3-3 stuff on that day. But being able to mix it both up. And I'm not saying that the defense is aligning for the offense to be able to go execute, but just so the offense knows, okay, we're going to get a bulk of this period, we're going to get a bulk of that next period, all the while the defense being able to get done what they need to get done from an installation standpoint also. So both. We want to be multiple and be able to bounce in and out of it, but also get a good, we're not trying to win a game this Saturday. We're trying to develop our guys and figure out, who can do what for us also from a personnel standpoint.
And that was Coach Beamer talking to the media there as he reflects on another week of spring practice, as 6 currently in the books for the Gamecocks, about halfway through all of spring practice so far. Hit hour number 2. Dimitri going to jump in here with me, talk some football, and more football as the halftime show rolls along on your Tuesday afternoon here on The Game. You got me? What's happening? Doing good. Yeah, I don't know. I was kind of split. I would love to see the rematch between them and Iowa, but at the same time, I don't know. Something about Carolina and LSU, it's got some nice juice to it. You know, it's one of those things that if you consistently watch her, you can get a little tiresome of the threes, I guess. But if you're only tuning in occasionally, then it's like, oh, hey, that's cool. That's true. All right, here we go. Oh, what did I have as notes here? We can, the thing about star power, since women's basketball is kind of the lead story here. All right. Hour number 2, welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you on this Tuesday in the Herndon Chevrolet Studios. Terry Ford will be back in with me coming up tomorrow, and we'll dive back into Coach Beamer's press and react to what he had to say a little bit more as the show goes along. But our guy, Dimitri, now joining us for the next couple of segments here. Is football, and more football in the 1 o'clock hour. Dimitri, how we doing today?
I am good, man. You want a little women's basketball with your football to start things off?
I like where we're going with this.
All right. So last night, everybody is tuned in to Iowa and LSU, right? And
sure.
Even if you are, no matter who you are wanting Carolina to get the rematch with, I think everybody came into that thing with a rooting interest, whether it was Caitlin Clark or whether it was Angel Reese or Kim Mulkey or whoever, right?
Right.
And so I started thinking about this watching the game last night. We are in a cultural moment for women's basketball that we've never been in before because of the celebrity.
Right.
And I wonder if we've ever seen that in college football. Has this sport ever had its moment where you have, now I'm talking on the national level, not just Carolina specifically, but when we have Caitlin Clark, we have Angel Reese, we have Paige Buchers, we have all of these names that have really generated, like that's been what's generated the growing interest in the sport. Has football ever enjoyed a single season like that?
You know, it's a tough question to ask because football's obviously always been very, very popular. I would say women's basketball certainly been on the rise as of late, but
sure.
And a lot of that can be contributed to some of that star power with the likes of Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Paige Buchers, and stuff like that. But I guess the best. Trying to think.
So I've got 2 years here that kind of jump out. I still don't think either are for football to the point that women's basketball is at. And again, I want to reiterate what you just said. We are talking about percentage from where it was to where it is, not, college basketball for women is up there with college football. That's not what I mean at all. But
right.
I want to give you 2 years that really stand out. The most recent is 2019, and I don't even know that is accurate because some of the mythology, let's say, of that LSU offense didn't happen until they won the national championship.
Yeah, and that's a team that's widely regarded as one of the greatest in college football history that gained, and nobody was expecting anything out of them coming into the year. Joe Burrow's prior year at LSU was fine, but certainly wasn't Heisman-esque. And, yeah, just as the year went along, that story continued to build and build and build, and, of course, culminated with the national championship.
And let me give you the other players that were having a season that year.
Okay.
You had Jonathan Taylor at Wisconsin.
Yep.
You had the other quarterbacks, Justin Fields at Oklahoma, Tua at Alabama, Jalen Hurts at Oklahoma, and Trevor Lawrence at Clemson. On defense, you had Chase Young at Ohio State. And then I think that Clemson's offense probably had the same kind of star power that year that LSU's did. The difference is that the LSU offense has gone on to do it in the pros. And in the pros, like, I think you could say Trevor Etienne has been a hit. T. Higgins seems like that as well. But for the most part, you don't have guys that hit beyond their college celebrity on that offense.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And I wasn't even thinking about how many of relevant quarterbacks were still in college football at that point in time, though the Justin Field thing, I guess, is a little bit debatable at this point in his career.
But I'm talking
but
about
back then, right,
exactly.
Obviously a big deal. And that because that was his first year at Ohio State after he left Georgia.
That is correct. All right, here's the other one, and I think this is the better one.
Okay.
2013, because in 2013, you have the season beginning with Jadeveon Clowney already being one of the biggest stars on the planet in the college football world.
Very true.
And on the other side of the ball, you have Johnny Manziel starting the year as one of the biggest stars in American sports at that point.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. That 2012 was a meteoric rise, and I mean, well, he started off the 2013 season on the bench because he got he got suspended for the first half of that game against Rice. But yes, he had cultivated all of American sports at that point in time. Everybody was doing the money sign and all that, and he came in just a rock star into that. What would be his redshirt sophomore year?
Yeah, and you look at really that year was about, in terms of star power, it was about the defensive side of the ball because you had Aaron Donald at Pitt, who draft heads were already like, holy bleep, what this guy could be.
Right.
Khalil Mack throughout that season became a bigger and bigger star to the point that it's a no-brainer. He's a top 5 pick. And I'll go back to what you said about Justin Fields in 2019 for the 2013 Bama defense. You had a lot of guys that at the time, Clinton Dix, C.J. Mosley, Reuben Foster, A'Shawn Robinson, like college football fans really knew who they were.
Sure.
And then on the offensive side of the ball, you know, even though this was a year that LSU didn't really have a great quarterback, their receivers were OBJ and Jarvis Landry.
Yeah, it's pretty notable names.
So the question, I guess, becomes, does college football have a year where they have that kind of star power? And also, is college football set up to do that, right? Because the artificiality of football's ratings, plenty of people watch, but the artificiality is that the sport controls the amount that is available to you.
Right.
So football ratings are always going to be bigger. I mean, there is a reason that the NFL does not want to get away from its nationalized media plans, is because they can just send you the average rating across the country for those 2 windows on Fox and CBS until you look at the tens of millions of people watching every week. It would be different if, like in college sports, the NFL let the team schedule when those games were going to be played.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, we're talking about a college football fan base that's been long existing, and we're not, I mean, there are new fans that come in, but not in the waves that I guess we're seeing with, with women's basketball. And I guess the better question to pose in this scenario here is, how much does the transfer portal hurt guys' abilities to become superstars? Not that, and obviously you still got to wait around 3 years to be able to go to the NFL, but, I think there's a difference between establishing yourself at one school and playing between 2 and 3 different ones, no matter how good of a player you are, on what that does for your reputation and star power at the college football level.
Well, for the most part, that I think is true, right? But you go back to that 2019 year. Let's talk about the quarterbacks I listed as the stars. Trevor Lawrence, Tua Tagovailoa, those guys start where they finish. But yep. Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts, and Joe Burrow all are transfers. Now, I understand the point you're making that we have seen guys transfer multiple times here, but I do wonder if we have had, and I'm talking quarterback specifically, maybe Caleb Williams is the closest we've had to this. Have we had a guy hit the transfer portal as a quarterback that people treat like that year that Tom Brady became a free agent, where if you land this guy, you're instantly a contender? I don't think we've seen that yet in the portal era.
Yeah, nothing comes to mind immediately, because typically, and the Williams thing was a unique scenario because his coach was going to Southern Cal and just wanted to follow him there. So, that's something we don't typically see because typically if you're a starting quarterback at a good place that could be a contender, you're likely not going to go anywhere. So, yeah, I can't think of anything else that would kind of be a similar example to that.
I think that, there were a couple I think that could have been, right? Like, I think that if all of those rumors were true and Arch Manning was going to hit the portal this year, I don't know that Arch is good enough to make you a contender right now, but certainly there would have been instant interest in that.
There would have been interest, but a lot of that rides on his name. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure.
As we've brought up many times, if his name was Arch Smith, yeah, sure, he might be a 5-star still, but we're not talking about him in the same regard as a Manning. So, yeah, I think a lot of what we think he's going to would kind of go a long way with that one if he did decide to to leave Texas, but he hasn't gone anywhere. And he hasn't gone anywhere, and he's still a bigger star as the backup than what I'd say Quinn Ewers is, even though Quinn Ewers is a phenomenal quarterback and it has the ability to lead Texas to some great heights this year, too.
And is it possible that the long-term best one of them may have been the one they let transfer in Malik Murphy?
Ooh.
I mean, I think that Malik Murphy has more upside as an NFL QB than Quinn Ewers does. I just don't know what to think about as when it comes to Arch yet because I haven't seen enough to make a judgment.
Yeah, he's played a couple of garbage time snaps, and that's pretty much it.
Exactly. Like, I think the fact that Malik Murphy is at Duke this year and that you didn't see hell, I'll put Carolina in this list. The fact that you didn't see teams like that make a run that ended up landing him, I think it's going to be very interesting to the way that we view that guy long-term in college football because I think he's really, really gifted. Yeah,
and he was decent in the couple games that he had to start when Ewers was out, so it's not like he went out there and performed terribly, but yeah, I guess when you are the third most attractive in that room, that can cause people to look at you a different way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And like tying this to women's basketball, I think Haley Van Lith from LSU, I think you would say was probably a bigger star last year when she was at Louisville, right?
Yeah, I don't want to say bigger fish in a smaller pond, but definitely was able to shine a little bit more.
Yeah, she talked about it before the game last night, that she had to learn to take she called it a lessened role, and what she's talking about is minutes and touches.
Sure.
I still think she was very valuable to LSU this year. It just didn't look the way that she was used to it looking like. So the transfer portal has played an interesting role this season in women's basketball. It certainly has not been, at least for this year, it has not been the disruptor that it has been for some teams in college football, men's college basketball since it came into fruition in 2021. Like that might be an advantage that the women's game had this year.
Yeah, I think so, especially when you look at a lot of these top teams that haven't completely overhauled through the transfer portal. And, obviously South Carolina brings in like Tina Powell to show up some three-point shooting. And obviously Angel Reese was a transfer from Maryland to LSU a couple seasons ago, but I don't think you see this ground up rebuild of teams overnight from the transfer portal where their own fan base is like, I have no idea who any of these players are.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think that the Angel Reese is a really good example of she transferred and then the star was born, right? It was not a high profile college free agency, so to speak. And I'm not saying there is any problem with that, right? Like I think that there are some archaic rules that are more likely to be overhauled for women's basketball than they are for football, namely that, women don't have the option that men do to go one and done. They have to stay 3 years on their team. That has certainly helped build celebrity teams, but I do wonder how much longer that stands. And if it falls for women's basketball, does it eventually fall for football? There are plenty of people that are of the belief that there is no logical reason that, we'll use some of those guys we were talking about, Johnny Manziel, Trevor Lawrence, Jameis Winston, those guys that you look at after their freshman year and think, God, he's ready to at least be in a NFL system right now.
Right.
There's no reason those guys should have to wait. I'm not saying that's my belief. I'm saying you hear that talk all the time.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. And as we're looking at the ever-changing landscape of college sports, you never know. That's something that could, change down the road, or maybe you do have a one-and-done in college football or some kind of option like that. But, we'll see what happens there. We'll continue on with football. Dimitri joining me for a couple minutes here. Dive into some interesting things in regards to the Big 12 and how they did pro days this year, which was a first to my knowledge of its kind. With that coming up next, it is the halftime show. He's Dimitri. I'm Tyler on your Tuesday on the Game. All right. We'll hit the Big 12 thing, and then if we can, we'll slide in DJ Burns at the end. Oh, okay. I gotcha. I mean, when you're 6'7", 275, I could see why people would be attracted to that. Yeah, that's a unique one. I think given the fact that you're already kind of in a natural rivalry there, being in North Carolina, that probably helps a little bit. Okay, sure, sure. Yeah, and I think I was talking earlier. I was comparing the men's Final Four to professional wrestling and who the heels and the faces are, and I said unequivocally, North Carolina State is the biggest baby face in the tournament, with the exception of the other people of Tobacco Road that hate them. But like 97% of the country is rooting for them this weekend. Uh huh. No, no, no. Go ahead. Sorry, Dave was telling me something. But man, what a time! Both men and women in the Final Four. Yeah, a little bit, and they also have the task of taking on the best team in the country. So, so in reference to the heels and faces thing, I said I didn't really know what to do with Alabama. That yes, the brand of Alabama skews towards heel because everybody kind of naturally dislikes them because of football, but like outside of the Southeast, I feel like a lot of people don't know a lot about college basketball or Nate Oates enough to like really hate them, if that makes sense. Right. I do think there's a part of people that are like, man, can they just suck at something, please? They have everything. What a time. All right, coming back in here. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Dimitri Ravanos, along with me for a couple more minutes here while Terry is out for the day. Reminder, you can always watch us on the Game TV. Go to youtube.com, search the Game TV, and also stream us on the 107.5 The Game app. Just head to your iTunes App Store, Google Play Store, give it a download, and take us with you wherever you go. Dimitri, you drew my attention to something yesterday that I was not aware of. So when we think about pro days, as we did with South Carolina a couple weeks ago when we were out there, watching Spencer Rattler, Xavier Legette, all the guys work out at the indoor practice facility with a bunch of NFL scouts, in attendance, we think about it from a school-to-school basis because that's how most programs do it. I was not aware that the Big 12 had just one big pro day showcase. Is this the first year? How long have they been doing this?
This is the first year, and this is one of those things. The commissioner that they hired was hired with the express goal of sort of getting people to rethink the way they view the Big 12 now that we are down to a Big 2 or a Power 2 from a Power 5, right?
Right.
And so you had every Big 12 school except for Oklahoma and Texas bring all of their guys together for a pro day. And maybe you say this year that works because even if you include the Oklahoma and Texas guys, I mean, you're talking, I don't know, maybe Tyler Guyton, who's last of the first round kind of offensive tackles. Maybe that's the best guy you have. Like the highest drafted guy that was at this thing is probably going to be Zach Frazier, the center from West Virginia. So maybe it's easier in a year like this to do something like that. But certainly if you're a coach of a team like, I don't know, let's say BYU, right?
Sure.
You've got a guy like Kingsley Suamataia, who is going to be very highly sought after in the second round amongst the tackles, but you probably have other guys you think can play. And the chance to get them in front of scouts that might not have come to your pro day otherwise, because maybe they don't need a tackle. Maybe they do need a tackle and they're picking before they'd have to consider a guy like Suamataia.
Sure.
You now get the opportunity to put them in front of guys that I don't know why more conference commissioners are not trying to sell their members on something like this.
And look, Brett Yormark is very much an outside-the-box thinker. He did not get hit to the position of being Big 12 commissioner the typical way that other commissioners do. Comes over from the TV world and, has definitely done things in his own way. And I think it's a very unique approach to it because you bring up a really good point, and I'll go back to South Carolina's pro day a couple weeks ago where Spencer Rattler and Xavier Legette garnered enough attention where there were all 32 NFL teams in attendance, and there was a litany of guys working out there that all were hoping for a shot to impress one of those scouts, at that. But not every school has that, and you can have some years where, you might have a guy that's going to be drafted in the first round, but you look at a place like Arkansas. You think all 32 teams are going to go out to Arkansas to watch the pro day this year? Probably not. So, yes, if you had like an SEC specific pro day where you have however many tens of hundreds of guys can go out there and work out for the scouts over the course of an afternoon, I think that would prove beneficial if you're Greg Sankey and trying to boast how great your conference is at putting guys in the NFL. There's an opportunity, maybe not to put dozens and dozens more in there, but maybe a couple guys that people would have otherwise been overlooking, maybe catching some attention for something they did in a drill or something that they did in one of the measurement specific things to get their shot at the next level.
Well, and remember, the conference likes to pound its chest over those day one picks or sometimes first 2 round picks. And I think the 2 guys you mentioned in Spencer Rattler and Xavier Legette are really good examples because they are in 2 different situations with their position group going into this draft. It is so funny to hear people talk about Daniels, Williams, May, and McCarthy, and the quarterbacks after it, it's almost like, oh, well, good luck. You're just wandering the wasteland if you need a quarterback and you get stuck with, Spencer Rattler, Bo Nix, or Michael Penix Jr. There's such a drop-off, right?
Right.
Well, okay, that might be true. There might be a big drop from 4 to 5, but that doesn't mean that it's hopeless if you are drafting that 5th or 6th best quarterback in this draft. And maybe by showing up to an all SEC pro day and you are getting a chance with Spencer Rattler to see him throw to guys that he does not already have that kind of chemistry with, you start to talk about, well, how does it look if we hold off till round 3 to take this kid? Maybe we could see some other ways of going about rebuilding our quarterbacking position. And then on the other side, Xavier Legette, look, he is a first-round talent, no doubt about it, but there are like 15 first-round talent wide receivers in this draft, right? So what can you do to separate yourself from the others? I think, like I said on the show a couple of weeks ago, I think Xavier Legette is a first-round talent. I think there are so many first-round talents that he is going to be a first-round talent that gets taken probably late second round. You got to have an opportunity to change something like that. And I think that in the mind of NFL scouts, they approach team pro days with a little bit of a skeptical eye, right? Because everything is set up for those guys to succeed when the team is in control.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, where if you have a conference-specific one, that's maybe a little bit more of a neutral standpoint, similar to the Combine, where you kind of get to see, and you know, obviously Spencer Rattler threw at the Combine, but you look at guys like Caleb Williams and Drake May that opted not to because they wanted to, again, go back to their own pro day or work out with their own wide receivers in a more comfortable setting to make themselves look better. And again, like you said, I think the scouts kind of look at that with a skeptical eye, because that's not always a true indication of how good they're going to be, because they're in a more comfortable environment with guys that they already know. I could see the other conferences taking an interest in this. In fact, while we're talking about it here, I'm already envisioning SEC doing this in like Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta and selling tickets, and tens of thousands of people will show up to watch their now former players just work out for NFL scouts. Like this could be a money-making thing for all we know.
Yeah, I mean, look, I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, where the Senior Bowl is every year, right? The Senior Bowl, the experience, part of it used to be that you would get access to go and get autographs from the players. Why couldn't you set it up that way? And then, yeah, you're right. This is a whole other revenue stream kind of thing. And then as you look down the list of talent, even within a conference at certain positions, if scouts are coming to figure out what they could do with the Alabama defensive backs, right? Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold. Don't you think, look, only one or two teams are going to end up with those guys. So don't you think like DJ James at Auburn and I can't remember his first name, but Rakestraw, the cornerback at Missouri, don't you think they benefit? Because those are probably third-round type guys. Don't you think they benefit by getting the eyeballs that are there for the Alabama corners that are probably going to be gone after day one?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And when we're talking about the conference as a whole, I think it benefits everybody, you know, kind of at the end of the day. And again, I don't think this suddenly changes things all that drastically. But yeah, if you have some of these guys that maybe were looked at as being maybe a 4th or 5th round selection that could jump up maybe into the back half of the 3rd round, that's extremely beneficial, you know, for guys like that. And again, some of the guys that maybe wouldn't have even been drafted or getting picked up as undrafted free agents, just being able to, you know, have the opportunity to show out in front of more scouts, you know, could prove very beneficial for them as well.
Yeah, you just hit on something that I don't think that the average person understands the workings of, is the undrafted free agent thing. You know, I think we have gotten used to in this area seeing a lot of Gamecocks and Tigers and maybe even Chanticleers too end up in either Carolina or Atlanta as undrafted free agents. It doesn't always work that way, right? Like some guys that know they're not going to get drafted start to work on relationships with the nearby teams. But for the most part, it is about, who did you feel good about? Who did you feel like gave you the best implication, recognition, best signs, I guess, that if you came there, even as an undrafted free agent, there was an opportunity that you could take advantage of. Like, that matters a lot. And so I think it would be beneficial for the players to be able to be in front of more teams, and for more teams to see how those guys participate in these drills and figure out, is there really an opportunity for you here?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And again, I could see some of these other conferences maybe kind of falling in line with this if the Big 12 does kind of end up being the trendsetter in regards to what they do with with
this
pro
is
days.
where it's going to be interesting, right? The SEC and the Big Ten very much are enjoying the smell of their own farts with this Power 2 thing, right?
Of course.
So I do wonder if there is a part of Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti that immediately dismiss this as, oh, that's some Big 12 BS. That's some have-not BS that we would never put our teams and coaches through.
I think that's also very plausible, as well, as they do kind of tend to like to set the standard of what everybody else does in college football. So maybe they don't bow the knee to something that a lesser conference has come up with.
I mean, I think it's a great idea. I do wonder if it ever came on the table, would we see the divide in the SEC like we see with the scheduling conversation, right? The schools like South Carolina, Missouri, Ole Miss, they don't want to add a ninth game and make their schedule that much tougher. And, the Alabamas, LSUs, and Georgias of the world want to get as much revenue as they can, and they know those conference games generate more revenue. Will we see a harsh divide, whether it is money versus no money, whether it is winners versus losers? Will we see a harsh divide within the conference on an idea like this?
Maybe so. If you tell every school they can make more money off it, I think that'll get everybody back on board with it.
I was about to say, your bend, I think, is the best idea for it possible. Make it a revenue event, not just something for scouts.
Absolutely. Well, appreciate a little bit of your time for hanging out, Dimitri, and we'll catch you a little bit later on.
All right, sounds good.
All right, Dimitri Ravenos will come back, and we'll get some of Coach Beamer, what he had to say in his press conference a little bit earlier on in the last hour as the halftime show rolls along. Tyler Head along with you going until 3 here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Tuesday. Appreciate Dimitri hanging out with me for a couple minutes there. And again, Terry Ford will be back in here with me coming up tomorrow. We'll remind you once again, coming up on Friday, it's your chance to golf with the game for our annual 107.5 The Game Spring Golf Tournament. Going to be out at Charwood Golf Club in West Columbia all day long. If you want to take part in it, it is $400 for a foursome, $200 for a pair. Give Charwood a call at 803-755-2000 if you want to register. Still believe there's a few more spots left this week if you want to jump in on that. And going to have some cool giveaways, USC baseball tickets, Carolyn tickets, concert tickets, craft beer passports, and more. So again, come hang out with us at the 107.5 The Game Spring Golf Tournament at Charwood Golf Club in West Columbia coming up on Friday. That starts a very, very busy weekend in a lot of ways. For South Carolina sports. Baseball going to be in action starting on Friday night, taking on Texas A&M in a very important series out there at Founders Park. Of course, the women's team going to be in action in the Final Four on Friday night, taking on North Carolina State for the right to go play for a national championship on Sunday. And then on Saturday morning, Gamecock football having its first scrimmage of spring. This, of course, will not be open to the public. We won't be able to see that until the spring game coming up here in a couple of weeks' time. But in his presser last hour, Coach Beamer mentioned this scrimmage happening for the team coming up on Saturday and was asked right off the bat, what, if any, objectives does he have for this scrimmage coming up on Saturday?
Yeah, a lot. One, just guys being able to get out there and execute and be efficient without coaches on the field and coaching every single play, just letting our guys be able to get out there and play a little. We've done a little bit of live tackling work in a couple of our practices already this spring and whatnot. So, but it'll be the first day where the entire day is, tackling and playing it like a game. We'll have SEC officials that'll be out there on Saturday. So our guys, can we play, somewhat, penalty free? There's going to be penalties, but hopefully we get in that stadium and we don't have a lot of the pre-snap penalties and things like that we can control. And then really just how guys respond, and we talk a lot about when we go across the street into that stadium, our mentality and what an opportunity and blessing it is to be able to go into Williams-Brice Stadium. And some people, whether it's 80,000 people in there or a Saturday morning with about 50 people in there, a lot of guys, they flip a switch and they rise to the occasion, if you will, and eager to see who really just steps up, because we got some great competitive battles going on in a lot of different positions, and it'll be the morning time, so the lights won't be on, but figure of speech wise, when the lights come on, who responds? And that's what I'm eager to see.
And the first scrimmage of any kind of spring is an opportunity to give you insight into what you have. And we've talked about this a lot. I mentioned it a little bit earlier on the show. I feel like South Carolina, is going to continue to have more questions than answers in regards to this team, through spring, through summer, even into fall before the season starts, just because so much has changed with this roster and with this coaching staff too, over the course of just these couple of months of the offseason so far. So here's your opportunity with this scrimmage to finally look at this in as close to a game setting as possible. As you mentioned, they're going to have officials out there. They're going to go at it just like a normal game type of feel would be, and saying, okay, well, here's the guys that we thought were going to be our ones on the offensive line, or here's the guys that we had working out as our ones at linebacker. How do they fare in these true game type of scenarios? Because it's one thing to go through and run a play or two consecutively during practice. You know what I mean? It's another thing to have to sustain drives and have to defend drives and be the play calls going in, all these kind of things. And that's something else to think about too with play calling and relaying of information between coaches and players, especially when you have as many new coaches as South Carolina has on this roster. That's something else that, not that it's going to be an issue, but something you just want to nail down as quickly as possible to make sure it's not something that you're dealing with when the when the season rolls around. Make sure that communication's where it needs to be, and kind of understanding everybody's roles and what everybody needs to do and can do in these scrimmage type scenarios, And again, they'll have multiple ones of those leading up to the spring game on April the 20th, and then that'll be our opportunity to really see them, in action. And are you going to definitively decide your starting lineup based on this? You're not. And as Beamer mentioned, there's a lot of position battles going on across this team. I mean, really, just about every spot on the offense is, technically speaking, up for grabs. There's certainly guys that have more of an inside track, more of a lean to them being the starter. But as it stands right now, you have a lot of those questions and saying, okay, well, where does Lenore Sellers stand? And how much farther ahead is he of everybody else? Or is he farther ahead than anybody else? Is Robbie Ashford, coming along? Davis Bevel, we read him getting reps as the third quarterback behind Lenore Sellers and Luke Doty the other day. So where does he stand? And obviously the running back situation with figuring out who's going to be the guy after Rocket Sanders. All these new wide receivers coming in, a new wide receiver coach and Coach Furry, and how does all that balance out? And again, you're not going to find the answers to these questions necessarily based on a spring practice or a spring scrimmage in the middle of spring practice, but it can help you get a better idea of where you're going with some of these rooms, where you're going with some of these positions, and what kind of issues maybe you haven't seen yet. What kind of things need to be addressed? What kind of things need to be worked on through the back half of spring practice? Because, again, we're 6 practices in. One more will just pretty much be at halfway. And, what is the focus on the second half of spring? What is the next thing that needs to be worked on? Who needs more development? Who did you think was at a certain level, and then you put them in a game-type scenario, and maybe they're not quite as good, or vice versa? Somebody you didn't think was quite as far along and thrives in a game-type scenario. Again, there's so much opportunity and so much potential with these kind of things, to hopefully springboard you in a couple different directions as far as what you're doing, what you're doing with your roster, and how that ultimately shakes out over the course of the next 160 some odd days, if I'm thinking correctly, before you kick things off against Old Dominion coming up in at the end of August out at Williams-Brice Stadium. So that's, again, coming up this weekend. No media availability, so we're not going to get any kind of formal insight into what that scrimmage looks like. But whatever we do here, hopefully it's good, and continuing to progress until spring practice, the spring game, and allowing the general public to see this team and its current iteration for the first time. We will hit our Firehouse Subs text of the hour. We come back, wrap up hour number 2, continue on with the football conversation, as well as Shane Beamer talked about a number of different things, good things, in his press conference 1 hour ago. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you on your Tuesday, going until 3 here on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, flying solo here today. Terry Ford will be back in here with me tomorrow. We'll hit our Firehouse Sub text of the hour in just a second, 803-404-6100. Want to remind you, baseball back in action tomorrow night, by the way, taking on Georgia Southern. First pitch at 7 o'clock. Pregame coverage will start at 6:45 right here on the game as they look to put together another win before taking on Texas A&M coming up this weekend. And as the baseball season rolls along, as does our 107.5 The Game Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Head online to 1075thegame.com each and every week and register for your chance to win. Pot is currently at $700, and whenever a Gamecock hitter blasts a Grand Slam this season, you can be the lucky recipient of all that money. And again, if nobody hits one tomorrow night, $25 more gets added to the pot, and you want to make sure you are registered when somebody does, so you can win all of that money whenever that does indeed happen. So again, go to 1075thegame.com and register for your chance to win. Time for our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, 803-404-6100. Our guy, Mr. Basset Hound, weighs in and says, I've never seen the fan base talk about women's basketball as much as Carolina. That is sad. Now, for context, and I'm well aware of this in reading this comment, that Mr. Basset Hound is a Clemson fan and trying to attempt some trolling. I can respect that. But if you have the best program in the country at anything, when you talk about it, I mean, and being a Clemson fan, they had the best football program in the country for several years, won a couple national championships. I talked about it a lot. So when you're at the top of the mountain, of course you're going to talk about it. I don't care if it's women's basketball or tennis or softball or whatever it may be. When you're the best, you talk about it. And South Carolina women's basketball is the best right now. And that's why we talk about it. We are the flagship for Gamecock women's basketball, as well as men's basketball, baseball, and football. So guess what? We talk about it. That's what we do. And hopefully this time next week we're talking about them winning another national championship and having a parade and all those kind of great things. All they got to do is get through a couple more games, which, hey, that's easier said than done. North Carolina State, who is definitely the underdog of the Final Four left, is not a slouch by any means. And then, should you get by them, you're taking on either Iowa or UConn, and I don't think we even need to say much about those two teams because we already know the reputation they bring to the table and what they're capable of, especially against South Carolina. So yeah, that's why we talk about them, because they're the best. Speaking of which, talking about where South Carolina is going into this weekend in the Final Four, and we brought this point up yesterday. Don even talked about it on Sunday after the loss. It does kind of feel like South Carolina's flying under the radar a little bit. You look at this past weekend with the Elite Eight and Sweet 16, where Carolina, had a pretty prime spot in the, in the middle of the day on Sunday, taking on Oregon State. They won and, handled their business there, but even before that game tipped off, it seemed like all eyes were focused on Monday night. Ooh, Iowa and LSU and Southern Cal and UConn, that was what people were really looking forward to, the South Carolina game. And maybe, you know what, maybe it has to do with the fact that South Carolina is just expected to bludgeon opponents to where they may have looked at that and said, South Carolina, they'll be able to handle Oregon State, no problem. And the game got interesting there in the late couple of minutes. South Carolina was obviously able to pull away and pick up the victory, but as Don Staley said the other day, I do feel like there's an element of people not paying as much attention to South Carolina. Not paying them as much attention, but just, I don't know. When you're as good as South Carolina's been, there's a level of expectation. So when people look at South Carolina and say, oh, well, okay, well, they beat Oregon State by 12. All right, that's interesting. Ooh, but let me check out LSU and Iowa. And I guess in a way it's kind of endearing that you just become so good, people expect you to handle your business in those kind of ways, which is exactly what South Carolina has been able to do. Now, I can guarantee you, nobody's going to be overlooking them or, let them fly under the radar now that you made it to the Final Four once again up in Cleveland, taking on a scrappy North Carolina State team and possibly another powerhouse in Iowa or UConn in the national championship game. But it's been an interesting dynamic surrounding this team this season. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that there's no definitive superstar. I mean, Cardoso's, I guess, the closest thing to that from a name recognition standpoint. Malaysia Fulwiley's obviously had her rise this season, but there's nobody as opposed to these other teams, and that doesn't mean that they're made of one good player, because Iowa, UConn, they all have good players outside of, Caitlin Clark and Paige Beckers, but those two dominate the headlines. And even Angel Reese to a degree at LSU. I mean, obviously, you got Flau'jae Johnson and Morrow and all those. They're also really great players over there, but Angel Reese garners more attention, and South Carolina just doesn't quite have that dynamic on their team this year. You had that last year and the years prior with like Aaliyah Boston, who we knew was going to be the top pick in the draft and all that kind of stuff, where not that she rose above the team, but she was known more widely than just the team itself. And I don't think you have that this year on South Carolina, which is a good thing. And if it wasn't the case, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it kind of reflects on where this program is, that they are truly just kind of the sum of the parts, right? Where they're all, work as one more than anything else. And there's no definitive superstar. And we've talked about it where, Cardoso has a great night, and then Watkins has a great night, and then Fulwiley has a great night, and then Raven Johnson has a great night, and all that kind of stuff. That's been kind of the story of the season up to this point, instead of people looking at it and saying, okay, well, how did their superstar do, and then how the rest of them after that do? That's not how South Carolina is built. Could they be built like that next year? Maybe. I don't know. But with this season so far, or with the season that we're currently in, it's all been about the team itself, not necessarily one individual player. And obviously, being undefeated up to this point, heading to yet another Final Four as the number one overall seed, they are obviously doing everything right, and hopefully can continue to do things right for 2 more games, so we can see Dawn Staley cut down more nets and hoist another national championship, and be talking about a third one in 7 years at that point in time. This time next week. So we will see how it all plans out, see how it all lays out, and continue to break down these matchups as the week goes along for the Final Four out there in Cleveland. 2 hours down, 1 more hour to go. It's Tyler Head along with you on the Halftime Show on your Tuesday on The Game. 2 o'clock, welcome in. It's hour number 3 of the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you going up until 3 and then hand things over to Jay and Elijah for today's edition of the post-game show. Look forward to that. Get their thoughts on what happened last night in women's basketball. And that's where we're going to start off with our headlines here at 2 o'clock. And we'll keep it local to South Carolina. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier in the show, but I think it's worth kind of revisiting. Camila Cardoso did announce yesterday afternoon that she does plan on entering the WNBA draft at the conclusion of this season, which is in less than a week's time now. This isn't a shock. Obviously, she's somebody that has been high on draft boards this entire season. If you go look at it at any mock WNBA draft, she's somewhere in the top 5, 4 or 5, depending on what expert thinks she can fit with whatever team they have her projected to. So she's going to have a career at the next level. She's going to have the opportunity to make a lot of money at the next level. And again, this is something I think we all kind of assumed. She did have an extra year of COVID eligibility left if she wanted to use it, but obviously opting not to, which makes a lot of sense. And, she's a very rare talent in women's basketball. First of all, from a size standpoint, there's not a whole lot of 6'7" women out there playing ball. So you have that uniqueness, which has obviously allowed her good advantage over a lot of opponents just purely from the size standpoint, but also size and athleticism. Her ability to get up and down the court and the ability to make plays truly makes her a very, very unique and special talent. And it's been a lot of fun to watch her here at South Carolina these past couple seasons. And I was talking about this with Wes and Chris earlier, where I said, she's kind of the perfect example of somebody that, again, was at Syracuse in year number 1 and transferred in 2 years ago and played a role off the bench, was not a starter, but still played significant time and played a significant role despite coming off the bench. And that could have gotten her drafted. Somebody brought up on the text line earlier, Letitia Ama here, getting drafted despite being a bench player a season ago, and Camila Cardoso certainly could have been one of those types. But when the freshie class moves on at the end of last season, she slides right in to the role as a starter. It has been the focal point of this offense for pretty much the entire season, sans for the couple of games that she was out with, being a part of the Brazilian national team or sitting out due to rest, or the 1-game suspension, quote unquote, she had to serve to start off the NCAA tournament. So, hate to see her go, obviously, but we know that she's got a great career coming up the next level, and very well could reconnect with some former teammates, depending on what team ends up picking her up early on in the WNBA draft. But I think that adds even more layers to this weekend when you talk about what all is, at stake, not just the Final Four, the national championship, and all that kind of stuff, but seeing Camila Cardoso in a Gamecock uniform for the final time. So, hopefully everybody enjoyed and appreciated her time here, and we'll hopefully get to see her go out holding a championship trophy and, with a ring as she heads off to the WNBA. Talking about star power in that last segment there, obviously it was on full display quite a bit last night, where you have Caitlin Clark, this superstar that's captivated the sports world, going out for 41 points again against a very good LSU team and a very good coach in Kim Mulkey, whether you like her personally or not. Kim Mulkey, after the game, was actually asked about how good Caitlin Clark is and her message to her after the game when they spoke while shaking hands.
Well, there's not a whole lot of strategy. You got to guard her. Nobody else seems to be able to guard her. We didn't even guard her last year when we beat them. She's just a generational player, and she just makes everybody around her better. That's what the great ones do. I think they had a kid that scored 21 and 18. She had 12 assists. Caitlin Clark's not going to beat you by herself. It's what she does to make those other teammates better that helps her score points and them score points to beat you. What did I say to her? I said, I sure am glad you leaving. I said, girl, you something else. Never seen anything like it.
I think there's a lot of people that are going to be very glad when Caitlin Clark's no longer in women's college basketball and when she's up and playing at the next level, because she has been a thorn in the side of many teams, many programs over these past couple of years, and I mean that in a complimentary way, because she's just that darn good, and you saw that on display. Once again last night, and it is hard to defend a player like that when she's pulling up from Steph Curry range, 27, 28 feet, and just draining three after three after three after three, especially for a team like LSU that is so good down in the post. Iowa took advantage, and 13 of 29 last night, 41 points, 7 rebounds, 12 assists. That's something else that is worth noting, because I feel like there's a perception around Caitlin Clark that she's very much a ball hog. She's not. 12 assists should speak volumes to that, because she was spreading the rock around a little bit. Her teammate Kate Martin, as Coach Mulkey mentioned there, had a teammate with 21 points, that being Kate Martin, and her kind of playing that second role in that offense that helped lead them to that 94-87 victory of LSU. And again, it's so hard to not project forward and just start thinking about South Carolina and Iowa in the national championship, because that's what we are all, I think, hoping to happen. I brought up the Twitter poll that we had out yesterday about who would you rather see South Carolina face in the national championship out of the 4 teams that were remaining yesterday, and Iowa won that vote. And there's the revenge factor, obviously, but I think there's also the fact that, man, if you want to win the national championship, you want to do it beating the best player, right? And South Carolina could have the opportunity to do that. I will say this. Iowa's path is not going to be easy. No duh, it's the Final Four. But you can't ignore Paige Beckers and UConn on the other side, as they picked up the victory over Southern Cal last night to get their ticket back to the Final Four. Here is Gino Auriemma, head coach of the UConn Huskies, on Paige Beckers' starring performance last night.
Paige always wants to be superhuman, and you can't aspire to be that, but she tries her damnness to be superhuman. Today she was playing against somebody that plays like they're superhuman. I think that was probably the toughest matchup that any of those guards had throughout the entire season. Maybe since they've gotten to Connecticut, I think Juju's probably, as difficult a matchup as there is or has been for our players. But for Paige, it's, this is what I live for. I live for these moments, and I think she almost looks at it as they have to guard me too. I'm a tough matchup for them, and she always tries to make it our team against their team. But I do know that she's pretty proudful of, she was pointing to her 10 rebounds. And I pointed to Juju's 10 rebounds. And, she had an excuse why, Juju got 10, or why she didn't get 15. She said she was busy locking up somebody. She didn't get 15. So when you have players that think like there's nothing I can't do and there's nothing that escapes me, they're just on another level. They play the game on another level. They think it on a different level, and they inspire everybody around them. So yeah, today was Paige doing Paige things.
And for Paige Beckers, who again I feel like has kind of fallen back in the spotlight a little bit, especially in this tournament with the Clarks and the Reeses and the Juju Watkins and stuff like that. Don't forget how great of a player she is. And not that anybody's forgotten, but maybe UConn hasn't been talked about as much in this tournament. And they've handled their business up to this point, obviously. And Paige Beckers last night on very much a national stage reminded people of how great a player she is, with her 28 points, 10 rebounds, 6 assists en route to the 80-73 victory for for UConn, and obviously she missed last season with her knee injury, and this was her bounce back year. And you obviously want to rely on your best player as much as you can, and for UConn, who's had to deal with a lot of injuries this season, they've had to rely on her even more, as well as several of the players in their starting five, because they've dealt with so many injuries. They don't have depth. And that's reflected by 3 of their starting 5 going all 40 minutes last night. Again, Beckers, Aaliyah Edwards, the 2 top performers for UConn, a little more well-known names, and showed you why last night as they scored, 52 of the 80 points? Yeah, for UConn in that win last night. Nobody else made it out of single digits. And I don't know. I'm excited for this matchup to see how Iowa and UConn go against each other. Do I lean more towards Iowa? Yes. Now, if UConn was at full strength, a traditional UConn way, maybe a little bit different conversation. This is a UConn team that we saw Carolina play a while back, and Carolina didn't have a whole lot of trouble with them, and that lack of depth certainly came back to bite them. And I think that will certainly hurt them this weekend as well. Now, Iowa's in a similar situation where they don't have a ton of depth themselves. Caitlin Clark played all 40 minutes. Marshall played all 40 minutes as well. I mean, really, 4 of the 5 starters for Iowa last night played at least 37 minutes. So they don't go super deep into their bench either. It'll be interesting to see kind of how that dynamic plays out between these two teams when they do square off on Friday night, and whoever wins that game, because it's one thing to do that to deal with that in one game. But as we've seen in these tournament settings where you're playing another game, in the case of the championship game, less than 48 hours after your first one, how much does that fatigue set in? So let's say South Carolina beats North Carolina State on Friday night, plays a UConn on Sunday. How much does that fatigue play into a team that can't go deep in its bench like South Carolina can, and doesn't have basically a second starting 5 on their bench like South Carolina does? Again, not trying to get too far ahead of myself, but that'll be something interesting to see play out if it does get to that point, coming up this weekend. Speaking of which, I posed this question earlier in reference to the men's Final Four as we are heading into WrestleMania weekend. Who are the heels and who are the faces on the women's side of things? Answer may not be as obvious as you think. We'll dive into that coming up. It is the Halftime Show. Tyler Head going with you until 3 here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head with you going until 3. Terry Ford will be back in here with me coming up tomorrow. Continuing to talk about the women's Final Four as the field officially got set last night. South Carolina taking on NC State on Friday, and then Iowa and Connecticut taking each other on in the nightcap on Friday to decide who plays on Sunday in the national championship game. This weekend is also big from the standpoint of it's WrestleMania. And for anybody that's listened for any length of time, you know, I am a very, very big professional wrestling fan. So I'm going to have a lot of screens getting a workout this upcoming weekend in reference to trying to watch everything in addition to baseball and all that kind of stuff. So I'm excited for it. But it got me thinking yesterday, if we're looking at the Final Four, I did the men earlier, I want to do the women now. If we're looking at the Final Four through a professional wrestling scope, who are the heels and who are the faces going into this weekend? Now, very similarly to what I said about the men's bracket, I think unequivocally the women from North Carolina State are going to qualify as baby faces. They are the one non-traditional power team, however you want to phrase it, that makes up the field of 4 left remaining for the national championship. This is a team that I don't think a lot of people saw them getting this far, despite the fact they were a 3 seed. But they're the ones that nobody's talking about. And if you're maybe a casual viewer of college basketball and you look at South Carolina, Iowa, and UConn, you say, well, one of these is not like the other. And then NC State, you say, well, one of these is not like the other. I'm just going to latch on to NC State. Hopefully they can pull the upset. I don't even know how much of an upset you'd say it is, but the underdog, or however you want to phrase it. So I think there's a lot of easy ways to connect them to being baby faces, in this context. UConn is the long-standing force in women's basketball. Obviously, Gina Auriemma has been there for a long, long time and has accomplished a lot. Multiple national championships. I mean, gosh, the team felt like it lived in the Final Four, for a long time. And here they are, back where everybody expected them to be at some point. And again, we talk about this team as if they're not, I don't want to say they're flying under the radar, but they're not being talked about quite as much. And I can understand that, just because it's not been a usual completely dominant year for UConn women's basketball, but they're still here and they still have a chance. They still have great players like Beckers, like Aaliyah Edwards, and they're going to have a good shot at the title this weekend. But that being said, I feel like they're probably still going to qualify themselves as heels, just because, again, it's a program that's been there and done that before. The general sports public does not like dominance. They do not tend to like teams that have been at the mountaintop for a while or continue to find their way to the mountaintop. Look at the Alabamas in football. That a team that, when they won their first national championship under Saban back in 2009 season, back in January of 2010, I think there were a lot of people that looked at it and said, oh, that's cool. A former power of college football finally getting back to the mountaintop. And then after a couple more, people started getting really sick of them, saying, okay, well, you can stop anytime now. And they just didn't. And we'll see what happens now in the Kalen DeBoer era. But there becomes sense of fatigue with a program like that I think is going to skew people away from it. Gina Auriemma also has been known to, ruffle some feathers and stir the pot a little bit in reference to things that he has to say about other teams and other players and other programs. Case in point, when you look at the comments that he had about South Carolina and their bullying style of basketball, as he liked to call it a season ago, that Don Staley, rightfully so, did not stand for. So, yeah, definitely heels. Iowa's interesting. Iowa is obviously the talk of the town and have been the entire year, really going back to last year as well. And a lot of that's, of course, due to Caitlin Clark. And there are plenty of people that admire Caitlin Clark. There are plenty of people that despise Caitlin Clark because she's just so everywhere. You know what I mean? You can't watch anything without seeing her being in a State Farm commercial or a hype commercial for the games coming up this weekend or whatever it may be. You just can't escape Caitlin Clark. It's very much the John Cena effect. When John Cena was at the top of his popularity and height in the WWE, he was everywhere, involved in everything, on every TV show, on every commercial, on every toy, and people just got sick of it because it was too much. And yes, people respected him as the best at what he did. Didn't mean they had to like him, though. And I think there's a sense of fatigue with it when it comes to Caitlin Clark. That if people hear about something being great enough, they're going to start testing it. And I'm sure there's some deeper psychological meaning or word for what that is necessarily. But all you hear about, you turn on SportsCenter and all these other things, talk about how great Caitlin Clark is. Oh, generational talent, the best we've ever seen, Mount Rushmore. Could she last in the NBA and all that kind of stuff? People get sick of that kind of thing. And I think that people look at her as a heel. Maybe not necessarily Iowa itself, because I feel like the Iowa program outside of Caitlin Clark is pretty inoffensive, if that makes sense. But I think people look at Caitlin Clark maybe as more of a heel or super babyface, depending on who you talk to. Again, kind of that John Cena effect where she could straddle both lines and appeal to both sides, I guess. But there's going to be a lot of people rooting for her. There's going to be a lot of people rooting against her. Now brings us to, of course, South Carolina. And this one's very interesting to me because from our perspective here in Columbia, watching the program, being fans of the program, however you want to phrase it, we, of course, think of South Carolina as a face. They are the premier standard of women's college basketball. Outside of this bubble, though, probably a heel. Go back to what I said a few minutes ago about UConn and the fact that it's been a longer reign for them, but they've been at the top of women's college basketball for a very long time. Won a lot of championships, been to a lot of Final Fours, the whole 9 yards. And something people got sick of. Carolina is in that same regard right now, where they are so good. And going into every single season, you can almost pencil them in for a Final Four appearance. And again, the general public of sports fans tend to not like those kind of things. They don't like the dominance. And South Carolina's dominant. They're undefeated, the lone undefeated team, heading into a second straight Final Four without a blemish on their record. And that's going to turn some people off. Now, there are a segment of people that appreciate greatness and say, hey, I'm not a fan of South Carolina, but I'm going to watch this team because they're the best at what they do. Those people may cheer for them, but I think a lot of people have that fatigue. A lot of people are going to be supporting NC State on Friday night, wanting to see the closest thing to an underdog that we have in the remaining in the women's tournament pull off the upset victory and vanquish the mighty, mighty South Carolina. Watch them fall. All those cliches. I think it also adds to it the style of basketball that they play. And I go back to what Gino said a year ago. I don't think it's a bullying style of basketball. I think it's just physical. That's what they've become known for. But when you do that, especially on a national stage, people are going to look at you as, oh, that team's dirty. That team is, too aggressive and stuff like that. And what South Carolina does is not outside the rules of basketball. They just can be more physical than other teams. Works to their advantage. But a lot of people are going to be turned off by that. And that's okay. And if you ask Dawn Staley, she probably, probably doesn't care what people think. But would say if people want to view them as heels, view them as heels. They don't care. They're going to go about their business whether you're cheering them or booing them. And that's what makes a great heel, by the way, is somebody that does not care what the crowd response is. As long as they're making noise, that means they matter. That means they're relevant. I think South Carolina is exactly in that boat. Where they're going to be people that appreciate the greatness, that appreciate Dawn Staley as a head coach and all that kind of stuff. And the people saying, I'm sick of this team routinely being at the top and going to Final Four after Final Four after Final Four after Final Four. I want to see somebody else win. And those people are going to be cheering against. Now, without question, if LSU would have beaten Iowa last night, they would have taken the spot as top heel. Kim Mulkey, obviously very brash, rubs people the wrong way. You look at Angel Reese, who, I mean, has kind of embraced the bad guy image a little bit in her time in women's college basketball. They would have, without question, been the biggest heels going into the Final Four if they had made it. That is obviously not going to happen now, as they got sent home with the Iowa victory as of last night. Today is April the 2nd, no longer April Fool's Day, and that means only one thing. It's the greatest day in the history of the world. We'll hit that coming up. It is the halftime show. Tyler with you going until 3 here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you. Looking out a beautiful, beautiful sunny Gervais Street out here in Columbia. Nice day. Looking forward to getting out there and enjoying some of this weather before it gets cold again at the end of the week. I just want spring to be here. I just want nice weather each and every day. Is it like between 75 and 80 every day and sunny? That's all I ask for. It's not much, right? Well, hopefully after this little spell of colder weather pushes through, we'll get back to full-fledged nice weather as we get through spring and creep closer and closer to those 100-degree days in summer here in the hottest place on earth, Columbia, South Carolina. Today is April the 2nd. It is indeed time for the greatest day in the history of the world. Going to keep a lot of these pretty recent here. 1995, the Major League Baseball strike ends after 232 days, dating all the way back towards the end of the 1994 season. Major League Baseball was the first professional sport to lose a postseason over a strike. And obviously, again, it crept into the early part of 1995, caused a delayed start to the 95 season. And that 95 season ended up being pretty okay, though. Braves won the World Series, beating Cleveland. And we, as Braves fans, I wasn't alive at this point in time. This was a year before I was born. But we as Braves fans thought that was the first of many World Series titles coming in the 90s, as the Braves would make it to a couple more World Series, unfortunately coming up short. But they did get the one. And it was another 26 years. Yeah, 2021 before they'd claim another title. And funny enough, I was thinking about this when I heard this earlier. The Braves have won both of their World Series titles, the Atlanta Braves at least, have won both their World Series titles following an abbreviated season. So you had the 94 strike that ended the 94 season, and then you had COVID in 2020, which caused that 60-game schedule, or however we did it back then, that the Braves proceeded to win the World Series the year after that. So I really hope we don't have another pandemic, but if there is another reason for the MLB season to be shortened a little bit, maybe on the front end, that I would put all your money on the Braves the following season, because they've done pretty good in seasons following a little bit of a delay or a premature ending to the Major League Baseball season. 2007, Florida Gators claimed their second straight national championship on the hardwood, defeating Ohio State in the men's NCAA national championship. This is significant to what being a student at Florida must have been like at that point in time, because you had the 2006 football season that culminated with the national championship. Florida, led by Chris Leak and Tim Tebow at quarterback, wins the national championship there. Then the men's team, who had already won the previous NCAA tournament the year before, go back-to-back. So for that, right at 12-month span, and you can even put it out even more, because Tebow won the Heisman Trophy the following year in 2007. So for roughly right at 2 years, man, being a student at Florida must have been the time of your life. They actually touched on that at the documentary, the Swamp Kings. That's what it was, the Swamp Kings documentary on Netflix, where they kind of talked about what the culture of Florida was at that point in time, with just winning everything. By the way, for anybody that watched that, I couldn't make it to the end of it because it was not as incriminating, which is a weird way to put it, but not as incriminating as I thought it was going to be. I thought we were going to get some real juicy stuff and overturn some untold stories on the Florida Gator program under Urban Meyer and stuff like that. But nah, it was just kind of a puff piece more than anything else. We didn't learn anything. I actually didn't even make it to the end of that thing, to be honest with you, because I just was disappointed. I got kind of bored with it. I think I made it through, it was a couple episodes, but I only made it through a couple of episodes before finally giving up, because I couldn't stand to hear Urban Meyer gloat anymore about how great that program was back in the mid-2000s, as I'm sure many of you probably didn't appreciate hearing either. But yeah, regardless of what you feel about Urban Meyer or that documentary, being a student at that point in time with the success on the football field as well as on the hardwood, man, you want to talk about some fun times you must have been having down there in down there in Gainesville. And finally, we fast forward to 2012. On this day, John Calipari's Kentucky Wildcats claimed the national championship, his lone national championship as a head coach, and obviously with him still being at Kentucky, the last time that program won a national championship, which going back to their exit from the NCAA tournament, losing to the Oakland Golden Grizzlies at the start of the tournament a couple weeks back, there was legitimate conversation. People were wondering what was going to happen to John Calipari. I wondered that myself. I reached out to some of my Kentucky friends, a few of them that I know, and asked, like, what would you do? What is the fan base thinking on John Calipari right now? And a lot of them were like, get that bum out of here. It's been 12 years since he won a national championship, which, again, shows what the standard of Kentucky basketball is, that, only winning a championship 12 years ago is not good enough. But, I mean, he hasn't gotten them past the round of 32 since 2019. That's unacceptable, especially when you're talking about losing to an Oakland team, which, again, Jack Golke, career night for him. You know what I mean? Great performance. We're going to remember that for a long time, but that's not a team that Kentucky should lose to, especially when you've got the entire collection of lottery picks on your roster. Now, again, we go back to the conversation of when you have a program that is built primarily on these one-and-done young type of guys, when you run to an experienced team of 30-year-olds like you did with Oakland, sometimes you come out on the short end of that thing. But John Calipari is not going to change the philosophy of what they do because, again, that's Kentucky. They bring in the five-star talents. The McDonald's All-American game is coming up tonight. Count how many Kentucky players are going to be in that thing. Probably quite a few. So they're not going to change anytime soon. And John Calipari sticking around for at least another year. Now, if they get bounced again in the round of 64, I think that conversation becomes a little bit louder with those folks up there in Lexington because that's really unacceptable if that continues to happen. But yes, on this day, 12 years ago, the last time Kentucky won a national championship, and only have gone to one Final Four since then. That was 3 years later in 2015. So we always think of Kentucky as being in that upper echelon of college basketball and, being the blue blood but that they are. Recent success hasn't really backed that up, though. But I don't know, maybe John Calipari can at least smile remembering those memories of 12 years ago on this day, April 2nd, which is the greatest day in the history of the world. We'll come back, wrap up today's edition of the Halftime Show, hit the Firehouse Subs text of the hour, set things up for the postgame show as well with Jay and Elijah coming up at 3. Tyler Head with you, flying solo here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head with you for a couple more minutes before turning things over to Jay Phillips and Elijah Campbell for today's edition of the post-game show. Time to hit the Firehouse Subs text of the hour, 803-404-6100. Jason weighs in. If you didn't hear it, I talked about heels and faces in the Final Four, both the men and the women. As, of course, this is also WrestleMania weekend as well. So I talked about who are the good guys, who are the bad guys in reference to the upcoming basketball games this weekend. We mentioned Mark Henry a little bit earlier as well. Jason says Mark Henry's going to be in town as a guest judge for some kind of barbecue competition at Lake Murray. I will need to find out where that competition is because I definitely need to meet Mark Henry if he's going to be in town. That would be the size comparison alone would be hilarious because I am very small and he's very very large. So I appreciate the insight there, and I'll see what I can find out because I live near Lake Murray, so that'd be very cool if I could find my way to figure out where he's at. As we close out today's show, again, Coach Beamer talked a little bit earlier in his usual Tuesday press conference as we roll along through spring practice here. I want to get to a few more cuts from him. He was asked, as, again, we're halfway through spring practice, basically, getting set for the first scrimmage of spring coming up this Saturday. He was asked where the quarterback competition stands at this point in time.
I wouldn't say separation. Those guys are continuing to battle. Obviously, when you talk about going in the stadium and guys being able to separate themselves, that's a position that they'll all get a lot of reps on Saturday and a lot of reps, and they'll get an opportunity to kind of show how they handle operating the offense with the coaches not out there telling them everything and coaching every single rep. So I think some guys there'll be some separation on Saturday, I would imagine, just because how we're going to set it up, and you hope there is, but there's great competition going in there. A lot of those guys are getting reps and they're all competing and making each other better. The biggest thing, Phil, I would say is just one, how they operate. Okay, they're in the stadium now and it's a scrimmage game-like setting with officials and everything. How can guys operate? Can they run the offense and communicate and the things that you have to do? And then certainly protecting the ball. They've done a really good job of that as the head coach. You love it when there's a lot of turnovers from a defensive standpoint because they're taking the ball away. And then you don't like it as an offensive coach or as a head coach because the offense is turning the ball over too much. And then when the offense doesn't turn it over, you're excited for the offense, but you're like, man, we got to continue to take the ball away like we've done a great job of defensively. But the last two practices, we've done a really good job offensively of protecting the football. I think there was one turnover today, and one interception today, but it was a ball that got kind of ricocheted, bang play with a receiver and a DB, and the ball popped up in the air, and it was DQ Smith running to the ball and made an interception. But for the most part, the quarterbacks have done a good job of making good decisions, and want to see them continue to just do that on Saturday for sure.
And again, first scrimmage coming up this weekend, and as we've talked about, Lenore Sellers obviously has the inside track to being the starting quarterback on this team because, of course, he's already been on the roster for a full calendar year. So when you bring in guys like Davis Bevel, Robbie Ashford, there is a little bit of a learning curve for those guys to kind of get up to speed and get acclimated to what South Carolina is doing. But at the end of the day, it really depends on what happens on the field. And, this scrimmage this upcoming weekend's first kind of opportunity to get a glimpse of these guys in game type settings. As I played for you a little bit earlier with Coach Beamer talking about this first scrimmage, I mean, they're going about it like a game. There's going to be officials there. It's going to be presented like a game. You're going to have drives and, rotating guys in and out and all that kind of stuff to where you're going to get kind of your first glimpse of how these guys gel together with whatever combination of talent they have around them. And I don't know if it's going to be something where you rotate in all these guys with ones and saying, okay, we're going to give Sellers one drive with the ones here. We're going to give Ashford one drive with the ones here. Bevel one drives with the one here, or whatever it may end up being. And again, you're not going to find out the answer to your quarterback battle this weekend, but it is an opportunity for somebody to separate themselves. You can't win the quarterback battle in the month of April now, but you can do a lot to shore yourself up, if that makes sense, to where, okay, now Sellers is 6, 7, 8 steps ahead of where Robbie Ashford is or whatever it may be. And as we've talked about with Robbie Ashford, for him to win this job, it's not something where it's going to be, oh, it's close, we're going to give the nod to Ashford. He's, in my opinion, going to have to be significantly better than what Lenore Sellers is because he's a new guy. He's coming in, not used to this system, not used to Dow logins, all that kind of stuff, to where he's going to have to be that much better than Lenore Sellers to win this job, which is why I think a lot of us believe that Lenore Sellers is going to be the one being our starting quarterback when the fall rolls around because, Robbie Ashford is good and got his opportunity to start at Auburn, but he wasn't exceptionally great. You know what I mean? Then there's a reason why he ended up getting benched for Peyton Thorne and why he ended up transferring out of Auburn, taking another opportunity. And again, this is something that's going to go on throughout the entire spring, throughout the entire summer, all the way into fall, leading up to that first kickoff against Old Dominion. We're going to continue to have questions about this. Coach Beamer, I can guarantee you at every single weekly presser leading up to or over the course of the spring and the summer and however many more times we hear from him leading up to the start of the season, that quarterback question is going to come up. And I would not be surprised if it is not until literally the days leading up to that game against Old Dominion that we finally get a definitive answer on who that quarterback is, is going to be. But, we'll see how it plays out as spring rolls along and what insight we can get from our guys at Gamecock Central when they do get the opportunity to go out there and, and view practice as well. And then, of course, spring game coming up in a couple weeks where we'll get to see these guys in action. I'm assuming live. I know Beamer wasn't really sure about if they wanted these guys to go live in the spring in the scrimmage, and we'll see what they ultimately decide to do in terms of the spring game in a couple weeks where guys like Sellers were live a season ago as opposed to Spencer Rattler not being live. So we'll see what decision they ultimately decide to make there with Sellers now being in line, or both Sellers and Ashford being running quarterbacks now in line for the for the starting job. So we will, we'll see what happens. But that'll do it for today's edition of the Halftime Show. Again, Terry Ford will be back here with me tomorrow. Coming up next, it's Jay and Elijah on the postgame show. I'm sure they'll dive more into what happened last night on the hardwood for the women, as well as some of what Coach Beamer had to say in his presser a little bit earlier on this afternoon. That's all coming up. It's postgame show here on The Game.